It didn't start with a decision. It started with a disaster. Zeno of Citium wasn't on a path to philosophy. He wasn't meditating on Stoic virtue or seeking wisdom in temples. He was on a ship, just a man, carrying what he thought mattered, until the storm came, until the sea stripped him bare. The wreck didn't just take his possessions, it deleted who he thought he was. And in that void, in the salted silence of loss, he wandered into a bookshop. That's where he found the teachings of Socrates. That's where he began again. Not as the man he had been, but as someone emptied enough to finally listen. That's what most men misunderstand about transformation. It doesn't arrive in peace. It crashes through your life when you've already fallen. You didn't choose NOFAP because you wanted to test your willpower. You chose it because something in you broke, because there was a moment, quiet, shameful, invisible, where you looked at yourself after another night, another click, and realized, this isn't pleasure. This is silence pretending to be comfort, and it's killing something in me. Porn wasn't the problem. Not really. It was the bandage, the symptom, the thing you turned to when everything else stopped making sense. After she left, after the job went cold, after your son stopped looking you in the eyes because you weren't really there, the screen became a safe place. Predictable, unjudging. But that safety came at a cost, a slow erosion of presence, a quiet theft of dignity. Until one day, it wasn't enough. Until one day, you weren't angry, just empty. That emptiness is where the path begins, not the challenge, not the streak, the silence, the decision that you will no longer escape it. Zeno didn't plan to become the father of Stoicism. He just refused to let the shipwreck define his last chapter. And you, maybe you didn't plan to rebuild either. Maybe all you knew was that you couldn't keep living like this. That's enough. Because it means something inside you has stopped waiting for rescue. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do, not as a slogan, not as motivation, as a map, as a quiet declaration. You don't fix a man by shouting affirmations. You fix him when he decides, without applause, without permission, who he will no longer be. That's where this begins. Not in strength, in surrender, not in control, in clarity. You're not here to chase purity. You're here because you're tired of being hollowed out. You're here because, like Zeno, the waves took everything. And now you're walking towards something you can't name yet, but you know it isn't this. And that's enough to begin. It wasn't lust that brought you back to the screen. Not really. Lust fades fast. It burns out quickly, like a match in the wind. But silence lingers. It follows you from room to room. It waits when the house is empty, when the lights are off, when no one is calling. That's what you were trying to outrun. The weight of your own thoughts, the noise underneath the stillness, the guilt that stayed after she left, the ache that came after another day without meaning. Porn wasn't your desire. It was your hiding place. What you were addicted to was escape, a predictable ritual that required nothing from you. No risk, no rejection, just a temporary numbness. You didn't seek stimulation. You sought disappearance, and for a while it worked. You didn't have to face the broken parts, the quiet disappointments, the conversations you should have had, the apologies you never received, the moments you weren't strong enough to stay present for. Every night you went back to the screen wasn't indulgence, it was erasure. That's what most men never admit. They weren't chasing pleasure, they were silencing pain. The pain of being emotionally invisible, the pain of not being needed, not being seen, not being touched by something real. The body remembers what the mind refuses to speak, and so it reaches for comfort, any comfort, even if it costs your soul a little more each time. There's a man I once knew, divorced, 2 kids. He told himself porn helped him sleep, but what it really did was let him avoid the weight of looking into his own failure. His son stopped calling him. His ex-wife's silence had become louder than any argument, and every night he sat alone, not to feel pleasure, but to not feel at all. That's the truth so few say out loud. Porn was never about sex. It was about not having to face yourself. Dopamine doesn't care about meaning. It only wants novelty. That's why you kept scrolling, searching, switching scenes. Not because you found what you wanted, but because you couldn't sit with what you had. And in that loop, something sacred in you began to rot. Your focus, your memory, your presence, the ability to hold eye contact with truth, all of it numbed. NOFAP isn't about suppression. It's not about pride or performance. It's not a scoreboard. It's a return. A return to silence, not as a threat, but as a teacher. A return to your own breath, your own weight, your own voice, uninterrupted. When you stop needing release, you begin to realize the urge wasn't asking for pleasure. It was asking for presence. And finally, you were strong enough to give it. He didn't have to hit you. He didn't have to leave. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from what was never said, never done, never taught. Your father's silence was not neutral. It carved you, shaped the way you responded to tension, to fear, to longing. You didn't learn how to wait through pain. You learned how to shut down, how to freeze, how to pretend you didn't feel what you felt. That's what his absence really did. It didn't make you strong, it made you numb. And so when life pressed against you, when she turned distant, when your career stalled, when your own son started mirroring your silence, you didn't know how to hold it. You reached for what was easy, what you could control. Porn was never just a habit. It was a survival response, a way to feel something without being touched, a way to simulate closeness without the risk of being known. Because real presence demands emotional weight, and no one ever taught you how to carry it. You may not remember the first time you watched him walk out of the room instead of addressing conflict, but your body does. You may not remember when you stopped crying because no one knew what to do with your tears, but your heart does. What you call a lack of discipline is often just inherited suppression, and what you call addiction is often just learned emotional escape. You thought control meant not feeling. You thought masculinity meant restraint without depth. But control without connection isn't strength, it's paralysis. And that's what the screen gave you. A moment where you didn't have to confront anything raw or unpredictable. You could be in charge. You could retreat. You could shut off. But the cost? You stopped knowing how to wait. Wait through the discomfort. Wait through the confusion. Wait through the grief that your father never named. NOFAP isn't about power. It's about patience. The kind you were never modeled. The kind you now have to build from the ground up. Alone. Quietly. And that's the great reclamation. Learning to sit with what your father avoided. To hold pain without numbing. To face uncertainty without disappearing. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to become a man your son can trust, even if your own father never showed you how. You can lift weights, you can count macros, you can build a body that commands attention when you walk into a room. But if you can't sit alone with your fear, if you can't stay still in the face of rejection, if you collapse the moment discomfort enters the room, none of it holds. That frame breaks from the inside out, because true strength isn't what you show, it's what you can carry in silence. The masculine frame isn't made under fluorescent lights. It's forged in the dark, in moments when no one is watching, when everything in you wants to escape but you don't, when you sit with the ache, when you stare at the phone but don't open the browser, when you feel the old pull rising again, but instead of indulging, you just breathe. Still, present, unmoving. That's the new training ground. That's the gym no one applauds you for entering. Zeno spoke of the inner citadel, a place no storm could touch. Not your body, your soul, your emotional stillness. And that's where you start building now. Not around discipline, but around devotion. A deeper kind of abstinence. Not from pleasure, from the need to escape your inner chaos. Every day becomes a set. Every urge becomes a rep. Not because you're proving something to others, but because you're reforging something inside yourself. You don't need a streak to validate your progress. You need presence. You need moments where your old self would have collapsed. But you don't. Not because it's easy, but because this time, you've decided to feel it all. No filters. No shortcuts. Just you, and the silence you once feared. Build your next 7 days like a man stepping into fire. Not to burn, but to harden. Choose discomfort on purpose. Not recklessly, not violently, but calmly. Walk straight into it. Not to conquer it, to hold it. To sit with it until it stops being a threat and starts becoming your teacher. That's how you build a frame the world can't shake. That's how you become unmovable. Not by lifting more, but by leaving less of yourself behind. Release isn't always relief. Sometimes it's leakage, a quiet loss of something vital. You think you're clearing tension, but you're draining potential. Every time you give in, it feels like a moment of freedom. But what you're actually losing is presence, power, focus. You're not resting. You're resetting to zero again, starting over and over and over. The world tells you release is healthy, that a man needs to unload. But not all release is restoration. Not when it's compulsive. Not when it's a response to pressure. Not connection. Especially not when it's to a screen. You weren't built to feel alive through pixels. You were built to hold tension, to transmute it, not discharge it. And that's the shift most men never make. They think power comes from control, but real energy comes from containment, from choosing to keep the fire inside, not to suffer, but to refine. There's a science to this. The body interprets ejaculation, especially through porn, as resolution. Emotionally, it signals, I've handled the stress, but nothing was resolved. No one was touched. No words were spoken. No truth was owned. Just a brief sensation. And the silence returns, heavier than before. Think of a boiler. Its pressure doesn't make it dangerous. Its pressure makes it useful, controlled, directed. It creates force, not by release, but by buildup with purpose. That's the masculine discipline NOFAP asks of you. Not to suppress desire, but to hold it with dignity. To feel the charge rise in your body and decide, consciously, not to burn it in an instant, but to carry it into your work, your relationships, your presence. You don't become powerful by chasing arousal. You become powerful by letting arousal become awareness. That's the edge. That's the tension. And if you hold it, not forever but long enough, it transforms. What once demanded escape now becomes energy, drive, depth. You begin to feel things fully, speak with weight, walk with direction. NOFAP isn't the goal. Energy is, but not the restless kind, the quiet, rooted kind, the kind that builds when you stop looking for an outlet and start choosing a purpose. It's not the act itself that breaks you. It's what it whispers afterward, not in words, but in the silence that follows. The feeling you know too well, that quiet echo of disappointment, not because you gave in, but because once again, you proved to yourself that you couldn't hold the weight, that you needed out. That discomfort still rules you. Relapse isn't about morality. It's not about failing some code. It's about reinforcing the story you've carried since you were too young to name it, that your pain is too big for you, that you don't have what it takes to stay with it, that you must escape to survive. But the truth is, every time you run from it, you deepen that belief. You don't just lose momentum, you lose trust in your own hands. You weren't weak, you were trained to run, trained by a culture that offers quick comfort for deep wounds, trained by silence that taught you your emotions weren't safe, trained by moments where presence wasn't modeled, only performance. So when the pressure rises, the pattern kicks in. You soothe, you click, you escape, and for a moment, it works. But afterward, something sacred feels smaller. Your self-respect, your stillness, your spine. And the next time the urge comes, it's even louder. Not because your desire is growing, but because your belief that you can't endure is. And that's the real addiction. Not to the content, but to the story that you're not strong enough to stay. Every urge is a mirror. It shows you where your edges are, where you still flinch, where you still believe you're not enough unless the discomfort disappears. But here's the shift, the one that turns relapse into reconstruction. Start seeing each urge as a moment to rebuild, not through resistance alone, but through awareness. Breathe into it, witness it, don't run, don't numb. Let it stretch you, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you're done letting it own you. Neuroplasticity isn't a theory, it's practice. Identity isn't changed by willpower, it's changed by repetition. When you stay, when you feel and don't flee, you're not just avoiding a relapse, you're rewriting who you believe you are. You're teaching your nervous system something your father never taught you. That pain can be held. That discomfort doesn't mean danger. That you, in all your silence, in all your stillness, are enough to carry it. And that changes everything. You stare at the calendar. You check the streak. You track the numbers like they mean something and as if more days equal more dignity. But time can lie. You can go 30 days and still be hollow. You can go 60 and still be hiding. Counting days doesn't make you free. It just gives you something to obsess over, something to perform, another way to measure control while avoiding the truth. Freedom isn't a number. It's presence. It's ownership. It's walking through your day and noticing when your mind wants to leave and choosing to stay. It's holding your ground in a conversation that cuts too close. It's telling the truth when a lie would be easier. It's letting pain breathe instead of rushing to silence it. Those moments, not the days, are what shape you. The problem with tracking time is that it keeps the focus on avoidance, not identity. It says, look how long I've gone without falling. But it doesn't ask, who have I become in the quiet? You weren't meant to live avoiding something. You were meant to live becoming someone. A man who doesn't just resist the urge, he reclaims the moment. Think of Zeno. After the shipwreck, after the collapse, he didn't mark his days with sorrow. He didn't say, it's been 1 month since I lost everything. He rebuilt. Not quickly, not loudly, but daily, in the ruins, without applause. He stopped measuring time and started measuring truth, and so must you. Count the moment you looked into the mirror and didn't flinch. The conversation where you stayed grounded instead of lashing out. The breath you took instead of reaching for the phone. The silence you honored. The discomfort you didn't try to kill. That's the new metric. That's the new map. No one will see these victories. No one will clap, but you will know. You will feel it in the way your voice calms, in the way your eyes soften, in the way your body no longer begs for escape. It's not about how long you've gone. It's about how deeply you've returned, not to a version of you that never struggled, but to the man who finally stopped running. You think the goal is to stop watching, to break the habit, to remove the behavior, but behavior is only the surface. Beneath it lives something deeper. Trust, the quiet, sacred bond between a man and himself. And that's what's been broken. Not your streak, your self-belief. You don't doubt your strength. You doubt your follow-through. You doubt your word. Every time you promise, never again, and return the next night, something in you stops listening to yourself, not out of hate, out of fatigue, out of grief. You don't trust your own voice because you've heard it lie too many times. You've seen your hands reach again for what your soul begged you to avoid. And slowly, over months, over years, you stopped expecting anything real from yourself. But that's what this path restores. Not purity, not perfection, credibility. A grounded, masculine credibility. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that doesn't perform. It simply knows that when I say I will hold, I hold. When I say I will stay, I stay. When I say I will carry this pain without seeking escape, I carry it. That's not abstinence. That's architecture. That's building the man you were always meant to become. Not for a woman, not for a badge, not for the online forums. For yourself. Because there is no peace without internal trust. No stillness without integrity. No grounded presence without consistency in your own silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, but not for display, not for applause, for your own soul. So that when you're alone, when the urges come, when the night is long and no one is watching, you can meet yourself without shame and hold eye contact and feel no need to flinch." That's what this is about. Becoming a man who doesn't just restrain desire, but directs it. Who doesn't just suppress emotion, but dignifies it. Who doesn't just avoid the old pattern, but rewrites it, silently, every day. That's not quitting, that's transforming. And no one can take that from you. He came back alone, Zeno. After the wreck, after the silence, after the life he knew had dissolved into the sea, he didn't return to celebration. No one threw a feast. No one called him brave. There was no crowd waiting at the shore, just a man who had lost everything, except the will to rebuild. And that's how most men arrive at the edge of this path, quietly, without fanfare, without support, just a sense, deep and wordless, that something has to change, that who they've become isn't who they were meant to be, that the pleasure they chased was just another layer of numbness, that the silence they feared is the only place where they'll meet themselves again. When the urges fade, no one claps. When the nights pass and you don't reach for the screen, there's no standing ovation, just breath, just stillness, just you, walking slowly into a life that demands more of you, but also gives more in return. Presence, clarity, peace, not because you've conquered anything, but because you finally stopped fleeing. Seneca said, "As is a tale, so is life. Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters." That's what NOFAP really teaches. Not how long you last, but who you become in the stillness, in the fire, in the tension you refuse to escape. So the question isn't, how many days? The question is, who are you when the silence comes? Are you still running? Or can you sit with it now, hold it, breathe it, listen to it, and still hear your voice beneath it all? Because in the end, that's all that matters. Not streaks, not stats, not applause. Just this, you, in silence, and the man you choose to be when no one is watching.